Hey guys, what's up? Today I'm gonna be filming my 2024 yearly wrap up in books, film, and TV. So let's get started. If I'm gonna be honest, it wasn't a great year in reading wise this year. It was pretty bad, not only because I didn't reach my Goodreads challenge, but also just the quality of books that I read sucked. There were some gems in here, but definitely could have been better. As usual, the books that I hold up physically are the ones that I read physically, and then if I don't have them physically in my hands and I'm like showing a picture or something, then those are the ones that I listened to or that I read on my Kindle. So the first book that I read was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think you guys know by now that I love Taylor Jenkins Reid. She's one of my favorite authors. I really wanted to read this year because I wanted to watch the TV show. So I read the book before I started the show, and they were pretty similar. I gave this book 4.5 stars. So if you didn't know, this is about a band in the 70s. If you see me looking down, it's because I have a little thing like with my notes on like my review of each book. This is about a band in the 70s that's loosely based off of Fleetwood Mac. The main story arc, like the main plot, is about Daisy and Billy, who are the lead singers of and songwriters of this band, Daisy Jones and the Six, and then their relationship with each other, but also the reality of being famous and the toll that it can take on you, as well as their complicated relationships with their parents. Yeah, it's written in like an interview style and made it a much quicker read than normal. I really enjoyed this book, not as much of her other two books that I read, which are Malibu Rising and Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I still really enjoyed this, and I liked that it wasn't just about like their Daisy and Billy's like relationship or anything. It was just they had each of their own struggles that they were dealing with. The next book that I read was Quarterback Sneak by Candice Steiner. This is another romance that I read. It's about Holden, who is the quarterback of his college football team. His team gets a new coach, and the one rule that this coach has is he doesn't want anyone on the team to flirt or hook up or make moves on his daughter, Julep. Julep is also working on the team as an assistant to the physical therapist. So it's kind of like this slow burn romance book about Holden and Julep. It was a solid story, honestly. I felt like it was much longer than it needed to be, but I also can't tell if that was just the way that like I read it, like my pacing, or if it was the actual book. I can't remember how many pages it was. I like how they address their personal issues, because Julep and Holden both have experienced losses in their life. Julep lost her sister, and then Holden lost his father, I believe. No, Holden literally lost like everyone in his life: his father, his sister, and his mom. He lives, or not lives, Julep and him actually live across from each other, but his family is basically his uncle and then his uncle's husband. I like that, again, there were other side plots happening other than just the love story. Still, it was a 3 stars for me. Like, it was a mid romance novel for me. The next book that I read, though, A Million Junes by Emily Henry. Oh my gosh. I have read 2 Emily Henry books. I mean, I've listened to them audio, and immediately after I went to go buy a physical book. So maybe I need to stop listening to Emily Henry books and just start reading them physically, because the narrator for Emily Henry books are really good, but I always find myself that when I'm listening to her books, like, I just want to annotate them so badly that, like, in the moment I obviously can't because I don't have the book in my hands. So I think I need to stop listening to them, or I can like do simultaneously both at the same time, but I just need to start buying her books and reading them. This is about June's family, they have one extremely important rule, and that is to stay away from the Angerts, who are another family that live in their area. But one day Sal Angert comes back into town after a really long time of being away, just college and his career, and June and Sal immediately find that they have chemistry with each other, but they don't want to immediately like go into a relationship, obviously, because a lot of things are stopping them, like their family history. And June's friend tells June that she also likes Sal, so June is like, well, I can't like do anything like with him because she just told me that she liked him, so it would just, you know, she'd be a bad friend. But the main reason that she really can't be with him is because of the family history, because later on we find out that the friend actually doesn't like him that much. So June starts questioning just her father's like deep hatred towards the Angers, and Sal and June both try to explore like how this hatred started between the two families, because the only thing that they're ever told is just don't talk to each other, don't go near each other, don't interact with each other, but they're never told why. So now that they've grown up, it's like they want to know. It's not just about Sal and June's relationship. I know Emily Henry does a lot of romances, but the reason why she does, I think why she does romances really well, I mean, in my opinion, I really like her novels because there's always more happening than just the romance. And yeah, like the mid 3-star romances that I give, they also have the same thing where like the two characters have their own things going on, but Emily Henry like just does it in a different way where I feel like the romance is equally as important as what's happening in their own personal lives, whereas in other books I feel like sometimes like it's just written just to include something else so people don't think that it's boring because the only thing in the book that's happening is the romance, if that makes any sense. There's more to it than just the relationship. There's also a lot about grief and a lot about friendship in general, like June's friendship with her best friend. This was one of my favorite books of the year, if not my favorite. I loved how Emily Henry dealt with grief, because I too lost my father this year, and so I read it at the perfect time because it was very relatable to me, and it was so beautifully written. Like, I don't know if you can tell, but this is a magical realism book. I was really surprised to read this because like I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this book, and it just kind of popped up on my Libby account, so I was like, I'll just read it. And I'm so glad I did. And she doesn't write magical realism in the novels that she releases currently. Like, they're all just normal books, and I didn't know that coming into this book either. Like, but I loved that aspect of this book as well. It just added to the story rather than take away from it. I loved the friendship between June and her best friend, and I loved the relationship between June and her family, her mom, her stepdad, her brothers. The only thing is I wish there was more of Julep and Sal together and more romantic moments. There is a lot of Julep and Sal together, but there's not much romance, because I could tell they had really good emotional connection, and there were a lot of deep moments between them about each of the losses that they've experienced in their lives. But because Julep lost her father and then Sal lost his sister, but I wish there were more like cute little fluffy romance moments between the two. But other than that, it was such a great book. Yeah, I need to like read this physically again and go in and like highlight and annotate, because there were some great lines in there. The second book that I read, this looks like I'm doing a peace sign, but the second book that I read was Meet Me at the Lake by Carly Fortune. I listened to this on audio. I gave this book 2 stars, you guys. It was not great. It went from starting off the year decently to just downhill. It's about Fern. Honestly, I don't remember this book at all, but I wrote a little synopsis. So it's about Fern, whose mother just recently passed away, so she takes over her mom's resort near the lake, which is why it's called Meet Me at the Lake. And one day this guy named Will Baxter, who she spent one day with 10 years ago, shows up at the resort, and it's kind of the story of the relationship and Fern realizing what she wants to do with her life, and just kind of like there's like a pointless romance in it, and it's just, and she's just, guys, it was so boring. There's also cheating in it. Spoiler alert, I should have said that before, which I hate reading about cheating. I hate watching cheating. I hate, yeah, just it was really bad. I heard that like the author, like Carly Fortune, that's like pretty common in her books. She loves doing like cheating tropes. I don't know why. I also just didn't care for any of the characters. Like all the characters were boring, and it was just, the whole plot was boring. It's like, what's the point of this book, you know? It was just horrible. So the third book I read is Mad Honey by Jodi, Picot, and Jennifer Boylan Finney. I just said her name backwards. Jennifer Finney Boylan. So there's two narrators in this book. One is Asher's mother and the other one is Asher's girlfriend. At first when you're reading it, you just think it's like a nice story about Asher and Olivia and their relationship, but it turns into something a little bit more serious than that the more and more that you read. And it's honestly kind of like a mystery, and we're all trying to figure out like what happened and like who did it. There's an exploration of the relationships between Asher and his mother, and then Asher's girlfriend and her mother. It was just a really interesting book to read because I didn't know what the genre was going into it, and I didn't really know what it was about, so it took me by surprise. I just had heard a lot of good things about it. Obviously, like the genre kind of changes from the beginning of the book to the end. It's a great book if you have daddy issues. It's probably gonna be a relatable book for you. I didn't even see the plot twist coming, especially the first plot twist. The second one actually I kind of saw coming, but the first one was really shocking, and then it was also very well written. I think they were, since there are two narrators, the two authors were responsible for the two different narrators, if that makes any sense, and it didn't make it confusing or anything, and it was written with really great sensitivity on the subject matter that they're talking about, and I can't really talk about what it is or else it'll give the whole thing away. Some books are really, like especially mystery books that talk about serious topics, are really tricky because some authors try to make it just like part of the plot for entertainment purposes, but they don't really go into the nitty-gritty of the topic. This one was again written really well and very raw and real, and you could tell that they didn't include whatever topic that they touched on in here for the plot twist or anything. Like they were very serious with what they were talking about. You could tell they put a lot of thought into it. The fourth book that I read, I listened to as well, is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. I don't even remember reading these books, but this is a romance novel about Delilah Green, who is a photographer, and she's living her happy life in New York, but one day her stepsister calls her and tells her that she needs to come back to their hometown to photograph her wedding, but she doesn't really want to go back to her hometown because she doesn't have a good relationship with her sister or her mom, but she still ends up going because her stepfamily is very rich, and so her sister is paying her a lot of money for this gig. And there she meets Claire, who is one of her stepsister's childhood friends, and they have this really funny like initial attraction towards each other, and that kind of turns into something deeper. Yeah, it's just a really cute romance between these two characters. It's honestly kind of tough for me to rate a romance anything above 3 stars. I think I've only ever given like 2 romances above 3 stars. Yeah, this one was a 3-star too, but it was a really cute sapphic romance. I'm pretty sure this is one of like my first sapphic romances that I read, and I really enjoyed it, and it was a fun read. A little bit sad, not gonna lie, because it does touch on like familial relationships and stuff. So I thought the relationship was really cute, and the one thing is, if you listen to this on audio, I wouldn't really recommend it because whoever narrated the voice for Claire was just a really strange voice, and it was kind of annoying. Also, the voice for Claire's daughter was also kind of annoying because for some reason her daughter sounded like a freaking toddler, but she was literally like I think like 12 or 10 or something like that, or I think she was literally almost a teenager. Like the voice just didn't match the age, so that was really strange, and it was just really annoying to listen to. But the actual romance, which is the whole point of the book, was really cute and very touching at the end as well. I liked the ending. The 5th book that I read, I think I also listened to this on audio, was Queenie by Candice Carey-Williams. This is about a woman called Queenie who is 25, and She's literally just going through life like all of us, just surviving, you know. She's a very flawed character, you can tell that from the beginning, but she's not like annoying. She's like flawed in the way that it's like relatable and you don't like hate her for it or anything. Just a book about her. It's very character heavy, takes you through her life and like the decisions that she makes, and there's just like some great bits in here about like racism and mental health and toxic relationships. It's just like things that like everyone would be going through in their daily life, more so if you look like Queenie and can relate to her as a black woman just living in this crazy world. I rated this 4 stars. I also really like listening to it. Queenie, even though she's very flawed, she's so lovable. Like, I just want to be friends with her. All the men in this book were extremely trash, like just horrible people. Honestly, some of the relationships in this, like that she has with some of these men, they're so awful, but they're so like, they're such realistic portrayals, which is the sad truth. Like, so many women put up with horrible men like this. I loved like seeing how she dealt with it, because it wasn't an instant like, I hate you, punch the face, and because it's not that easy sometimes. It's not that easy to get out of a toxic relationship. I love just going through her journey of self-worth. She's just really funny, and she can be really frustrating obviously, but it's just her being human. Like, I'm sure if people wrote about me in my life, like, you would be frustrated some of the decisions that I made too, you know. Like, it's such a relatable thing. The 6th book that I read is Mile High by Tomforde. I read this on my Kindle. So this is about Xanders, who is a famous NHL player, and Stevie, who is a flight attendant for the airline that the NHL team flies on. And it's like this enemies to lovers between the two of these characters. Again, romance, so it was a basic 3 stars for me. This was a really fun romance though, and I love that they incorporated Stevie's struggles with her body confidence. And then Xanders and Stevie both have mommy issues, so that really impacts the way that they view themselves and how they behave in this relationship, and then how they behave in like other, you know, non-romantic, like platonic, like relationship, like friendships and stuff. And they do kind of trauma bond because of this, but it's also not in a toxic way. Like, it's kind of healthy, because it's like, if 2 people in a relationship like have similar issues or just have issues in general with things, yeah, like there is a chance that they could trauma bond, but the other part of it is having a healthy relationship and just talking about the issues, rather than like using the hurt from those previous traumas against each other, you know. They both end up going to therapy for their problems, which was something that I really liked, and they have a good support system around them too, so that of course helps them. I really like the whole like senior dog adopting part of this book, because I love dogs, and I really like the way that it showed how like having an animal can really improve your emotional health, because Xanders adopts a dog and it really helps him. The only thing is, I do think it was a little bit too long and it was very repetitive, which I didn't enjoy. Like, I get annoyed when people say the same shit in real life like 20 times. I'm like, yeah, you already told me this. So reading that in a book, it's like, really? I also found a lot of grammar errors in my Kindle. Maybe reading it on my Kindle had something to do with it, I'm not sure. But other than that, it was fun, and I would recommend it if you're looking for a cute, fun romance. Even though it was a 3-star romance for me, it's honestly a little bit like higher on the list than the other 3-star romances. So maybe this would be like a 3.2 if we're really digging into it, but I would recommend. The 7th book that I read is Palace of Illusions by Chitra, Banarjee, Divakaruni, which is a recommendation I heard somewhere, but I listened to this on audio. It's basically a retelling of the Mahabharata from Draupadi's perspective, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember much about this book at all. But I remember that after I finished it, I did really like it. And I do remember Panchali, which is another, I think that's another name for Draupadi. So Panchali and Draupadi are the same person, they just have two different names. And I do remember her character, she's obviously the narrator, she's the center of the book because the whole book is from her perspective. And I did love reading it from her perspective because she's just obviously a very strong lady. And at the time, obviously the Mahabharata was written from a male's perspective, so it's really refreshing to read it in this way. It was so much more interesting and entertaining reading it from her because she's just a more nuanced character than any man could ever be. In the other accounts of the Mahabharata, she's like, in the original Mahabharata, she is like portrayed just as a victim, and that's just her identity as a victim. She doesn't have like much else of a role. In reality, she's actually this extremely rebellious, empowering woman that takes her destiny into her own hands. And it's definitely not a perfect book by any means, but like, for example, there is like obvious depiction of gender roles and stereotypes and that are not addressed in this novel, but overall it was good. I do remember thinking like, this is something that I just need like the whole of India to read. So I would give this book a 4 stars. The 8th book I read is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. The movie came out this year. I really wanted to read the book before I watched the movie. I'm so glad I did because the movie was terrible. Actually, it wasn't terrible, but it was pretty bad. I would give it like 2 stars because why did it look like Disney Channel made it? You know? Like, everything looked so fake. And yeah, I do really like the book. It's, if you didn't know, it's extremely popular, but I'll still tell you the synopsis. It's about Alex Claremont Diaz, and who's the son of the president of the US, and then Prince Harry, who is the son of the Queen of England. And this is like an enemies to lover story between the two boys. They are in a situation where they have to form a friendship for publicity purposes, but that fake friendship obviously turns into something else. Yeah, this was another pretty fun romance to read. This was actually a 4-star for me because I loved the banter between the two. I didn't think it was cringy cheesy, it was cute cheesy. I thought like the formation, even though it's like kind of like, it's like really the son of the Queen of England and the son of the President of the United States, like really it did like feel very natural the way that these two characters came together and came over their enemiesness, and nothing felt forced. It was definitely much better than the movie, as I said previously. And the one thing the movie did get right was the casting. I thought the casting was perfect, and I liked the chemistry between the two actors, but this is so much better. Because in the movie you can definitely tell in some of the clips, like, you're like, these people are acting. Like, I feel like I'm being taken out of the story a little bit and just being very critical, because it wasn't like, it didn't immerse me in any way, you know, like the book did. The 9th book that I read was Palestine 1936 by Oren Kessler. I listened to this on audio. I just wanted to learn more about Palestine with everything that's going on recently. And so this is about how the Great Arab Conflict started and the trajectory of the Middle East conflict as a whole. So Jews and Palestinians actually lived peacefully amongst each other before the British came along. So it talks about how the British assisted in the uprisal of the Zionist project, and then also how Palestine was struggling to fight for their independence, and the revolt to end Zionism had instead hurt the Arab communities even more. Just in general, how the war happening today actually started an extremely long time ago, and this conflict has been brewing for so long, and it's just like no one paid attention to it until now, until it's gotten really bad. And I didn't give this book a rating because it didn't feel right to be rating something that's just extremely real to a lot of people. I do recommend it's a very well written, informative book about the whole conflict, obviously, and I don't know if this is the book you should go for first if you don't know anything about the conflict at all, because it is a lot of information at one time and it's pretty dense. At least it was for me. Again, I don't know if that's because I listened to it. Maybe if I read it physically I could have read it slower and maybe wouldn't feel like that, but listening to it I felt like I couldn't multitask while listening to it because I like had to put my focus on what the narrator was saying. So I would suggest reading articles or other works first before coming to this book. I think it helps piece things together with, again, what's going on currently. It provides kind of the history to how, like, what led up to this, basically. And I saw a review on Goodreads and I thought they worded it like so perfectly. And just in general, this is a comment that just summed up what I learned from this book. And someone wrote, when one group of people dehumanize and denies the existence of the other, there's little opportunity for a resolution to this problem. But I do recommend it if you've been reading things online. Like, obviously Instagram isn't like the perfect place to get all your information, but there are some informative carousel posts and stuff like that people have been posting. So if you have gathered like enough information from social media to know what's going on and you're just like, I know what's happening right now, but how did this even start in the first place? I think this book is great for that. The 18th book that I read this physically, is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is about a little girl in a store that sees a robot that she likes, and her name is Clara, and she purchases Clara to accompany her as a friend. People know that Clara is kind of like a different robot in the sense that she's more observant. By people, I mean like the other robots in the store and her boss, like her manager, the manager of the store that owns the store and the robots in it. The owner kind of recognizes that Clara is like just different than the other robots just because she's more observant, and it's basically about life through Clara's point of view. Y'all, I was so excited for this book, okay, because it's such an interesting premise, because it's not like robots are meant to be emotional, and they're not meant to be in this book at all. And Clara's not necessarily emotional, and she's not necessarily human-like. She's not really close to it either, but like she does have a little, like, just a little bit of a quirk to her where you can tell that she cares, but she really can't because she's a robot. Yeah, I was just so ready for this book to be amazing and life-changing, but it really fell flat for me. It was so boring, it was slow. Concept, again, was really interesting, and the book had so much potential, but I didn't care for any of the characters, which is kind of sad because the little girl is supposed to be like, I think she's disabled or just chronically ill, and so Clara initially hired for her to like assist her with that, but there was no plot to this book really, and that's okay. But if there's no plot, then you want the characters to be strong, and the characters weren't that strong either. Like, the only character that I can remember is the mom, and I didn't even like the mom, so that's probably why I remember the mom. Since there was not much of a plot and not standout characters, I was just really confused when there was like that plot twist at the end of the book, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, because it's like, where did this come from, you know? It was just so out of left field, and there was no leading up to it. Like, they hinted at it, but it was honestly so strange. I felt like it was just kind of there for shock factor. It didn't really shock me. I was just kind of like, I mean, it shocked me in the way that I was like, what? But not in the way that I'm like, oh my god, like, that's such a good plot line that way. So, 2.5 stars. I didn't like it. The next book that I listened to is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is about Viv, who has retired from fighting, so she decides to open up a cafe. But no one knows what coffee is in this fantastical land, and there are people that come in the way of her business, and she has to recruit a partner, and the rest is history. So I listened to this and I don't remember much, as I said, and I can't remember anything about it, but I do remember it being cozy, and there was nothing crazy happening, and it wasn't like super plot heavy. It was just kind of like a cozy fantasy book about this girl trying to open a coffee business. I don't know, really interesting, because it's something like very human like within this super fantastical land, but it was 3-star for me. The next book that I read on my Kindle was A Deal with the Devil by Elizabeth O'Rourke. And so there's a girl in this book who I can't remember the name of, and she's the assistant of this famous plastic surgeon. She becomes his assistant because her good friend is going away to adopt his daughter. So he's like, can you just like take over this job for a month for me? Yeah, it's basically the romance between this assistant girl, and then the surgeon, the plastic surgeon. His name is Hayes, but I don't remember her name at all. I rated this 3 stars. I don't remember much about this book. I remember it was fun, and it was just average romance read for me. I liked that there were other things going on other than just the romance plot. Hayes had his own dilemmas about his career choice, and then the girl has her own issues going on with her mom and her sisters. Yeah, that's all I remember. The next book that I read was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. Again, I wanted to read this book before the Netflix series, and what was that Netflix series? I'm so confused because they didn't match the book up at all. Like, the casting was good, especially Pip. I think she was like the perfect casting, but what the freak did they do to the story? Like, I don't understand. The book is so much better. If you didn't read the book and you just watched the show, then it's good. But if you did read the book, then the show is just like a mess, honestly. Well, it's about Pip actually, but this girl named Andy Bell goes missing, or like gets murdered by her boyfriend. So not really necessarily missing. She just gets murdered by her boyfriend and nobody can find her body. And it's about Pip trying to figure out what happened, because Pip believes that her boyfriend didn't actually murder her, because she knew the boyfriend. For her like senior project, she decides to take this into her own hands and figure out what happens, and for that she recruits Sal, who is the brother of the alleged murderer, and it's just kind of about Sal and Pip's friendship that maybe turns into something else, and just their journey together trying to find out what happened, if Sal's brother actually did kill Andy or if it was someone else, also where's the body, things like that. So yeah, I really like this book. Even though it's targeted towards a younger audience, it's honestly better than a lot of new adult thrillers that have come out. I didn't really find it cringy or anything or immature, because sometimes when older authors like write about younger people, especially people in high school, they make them sound so ridiculous. And yeah, a lot of high schoolers are immature, but the language that some of these authors write are just like, it's like, that's not how high schoolers talk, you know? So yeah, it wasn't like that. Like, it was pretty easy to read. I really liked Pip's character. There's so many twists and turns in this book that I didn't really see coming. I didn't see the end coming. I was just really invested, to be honest. Like, I was sat, like, I want to finish this. I think it's a trilogy, so I'm gonna finish it. It was written really well, and it wasn't confusing, even though there is a shift between two different like timelines, because they talk about what's happening before the murder, or like what happened the night of the murder, I should say, and then like Pip in present day trying to figure out what happened. So yeah, 5 stars for me. Next book that I read was Heartstopper Volume 4. So this volume is about Charlie and Nick, again, progressing more seriously into their relationship. Like, they want to say I love you to each other, and Nick is trying to come out to his dad, who is not very present in his life. Also, trigger warning for eating disorders, because that's something that Charlie has to deal with. It was a really sweet read, and I loved seeing Charlie and Nick's progression in their relationship and how they come together to talk about difficult things that are happening in each of their own lives. Seeing them like deal with it together, it was so heartwarming. Heartstopper, more like heart going, you know, more like heartwarming. Anyways, 5 stars. The next book that I literally don't even have because I hated it, it's gone, it's been donated, is Final Girls by Riley Sager. I did read this physically, which is sad because that means I spent money on it. I wish I didn't. But this is about Quincy, who is on a vacation with some friends, and all of her friends get murdered except for her, and she becomes a final girl, and other similar events have happened in other places. There are other final girls, and Sam, who is one of the final girls from the other murder that occurred, comes back or not comes back, she comes into Quincy's life and kind of messes it up and has her like re-questioning everything, because Quincy kind of like forgets like what happened that night because it's just so dramatic. Yeah, I was so excited for this book because like Final Girls, like, you know, like I want to see how they're gonna get back at everything that happened to them. I didn't read any reviews or anything before getting into this book. I know Riley Sager is very hit and miss for a lot of people, but I just heard like some booktubers talk about this book, but I didn't remember like their opinions or anything. Yeah, but I should have known better, because a book called Final Girls written by a man, it's like the red flag is flying high, you know? It was just so boring, to be honest, and I didn't care about any of the characters. It was so repetitive. There was nothing too significant happening in the first 80%, and then the last 20% was just a shit show. That's literally the only reason why I didn't see the end coming. 2-star book. It was not good. The next book that I read is Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. If you can't tell, I like to put a little palette cleanser between each serious book that I read, because if I go serious book after serious book after serious book, I will literally jump out of my window. So I need a palette cleanser. So these are kind of like palette cleansers plus like other romance books that I just read on my Kindle. This volume is about Nick and Charlie, who are officially in love. You know, they have said it to each other. In this book, they're finding out how to become more physical with each other, and Nick is starting to think about college, which might have some effect on his relationship with Charlie, because they might be long distance. And of course there's side plots going on in the friend group, and the other friends in the group are also trying to finalize what they want to do in college, or if they even want to go to college. Just very real and relatable things that a lot of people go through, you know? And you can probably already guess my rating for it. Easy 5 stars. The next book that I read is The Woman Warrior by Maxine Kingston. I read this physically. I actually got this like in a little secondhand reselling book event at my university. It's a collection of short stories. There's 5 short stories in here by a Chinese American woman. It's about Chinese myths, family, and events that occurred in her childhood in California, where she lived, that have shaped her identity. It's basically Maxine weaving her own story using her Chinese roots and her present American reality into these 5 short stories. I give this book 4 stars. This was a great book. It helped me learn a lot more about the Chinese American experience. I loved how the way women's power is portrayed, and it was surprisingly funny at times as well. This was actually written in 1977, and it remains to be a great feminist novel today. I love the writing. It's completely unique to what I normally read. It's like, I've read like memoirs and things, but this is not exactly a memoir. I think she kind of included like other people's experiences into this as well, kind of, that she has also experienced, you know, like a universal experience type of thing. It was hard for me to understand some parts of the book, which is why I gave it a 4 stars. I don't know if it's because this was written in 1977 and the English was kind of different. In some sections of the book I did have to go back and like reread some of this stuff, but other than that, it was a great book and there was a lot to learn from it. Also some things that I could relate to as well as South Asian woman living in the United States. The next book that I read is Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. So this is basically a book about Dolly Alderton's life and her relationship and what she learned from all her relationships, basically. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I have a lot to say about this book, so let's get started. So the things that I did like about this book was the way that it was written. It's very easy and digestible to read, and obviously very entertaining. There were great anecdotes from this book, but overall it kind of fell flat for me as I kept on reading. It's not very relatable, you know, at all, actually, which is not what I expected at all, because reading this title, like, it just sounds so relatable, it looks so relatable, something about it just gives relatable, but it wasn't really, because like the way that she writes, it almost like tricks you into thinking you can relate to some things. But as the more and more that she talks about her experiences, you can tell like how privileged she is and all of the things that she's able to get away with that, for example, someone like me would never be able to get away with. I wouldn't even think to do some of the things that she's done because like I just know that I would instantly face consequences. So I was also confused about the points in the book where she had letters to her friends. I don't understand if she actually sent those out at one point or if they were just written in the book, because some of the letters are like just awful. Like I don't know if she thinks that they're like funny, so she put them in there. There's some horrible things in these letters, but even if she didn't send them through like emails or like a physical letter, like she still wrote them in the book. So it's like, wouldn't your friends read your book and then like see what you wrote about them? And like, I don't know, it was just the whole thing about the letters to friends. I just didn't understand that at all. I don't think there's any coincidence that when I go on Goodreads to see who really liked this book amongst the people that I follow, it was just all the white straight women, to be honest. It's honestly giving Taylor Swift vibes. It's giving Swifties. But it was just not a bad thing, like, but it's just a very singular experience, you know? Like, yeah, like every time I hear a good review about this book, if I'm like watching a YouTube video or something, it's like always a certain type of person that likes this book. It's just a very singular, like, niche experience that only like a certain demographic can relate to, you know? So yeah, 3.5 stars. The next book that I listened to was I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. I heard Jack Edwards on YouTube like talk about this a lot, and I had no book lined up to read next, so I was like, oh, this is available on Libby, so let me read it, because it's also written by a fellow brown lady and I just want to see what's up, you know? So it's basically about a woman that tells her experience being in an unfaithful relationship. It examines like the complicated hold that we have on our partners, or our partners have on us, or that we have on each other. My review is also 3.5 stars for this book, because I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't sure about this book at first, and after I finished it, I still wasn't sure what to think about this book. I just hate reading about books where someone is cheating, and that's basically the entirety of this book. But at the same time, I can appreciate the way that she portrayed like the messiness of her life. There's not really a plot to this book, which I don't mind. I liked the main idea of the book, which is just like how harmful social media can be on your self-image, and just constantly comparing yourself to other people. Although it did feel repetitive at times, which I don't really like. And so kind of just the same issues that I had with that Carly Fortune book, but instead this one felt like more real account. Like I can tell this kind of felt like a memoir or something. Yeah, it was a little painful to read, so I don't think I really understood the point. I don't think I could really get to the core of this book. Honestly, it's probably my fault, because the cheating was like literally like, it felt like something was like blocking my like way to actually get to the core of this book or something, because I don't know, I just can't do cheating. It's so difficult for me to read about, and it's so difficult for me to not judge as well, because I'm just like, I just want to shake the character or the narrator or the person that this is about and be like, get out of there, girl, okay? Like, get out of there, you know? Like, what are you doing? So, yeah. But the next book that I listened to was Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Obviously, this was one of people's like favorite books ever. So at first I was like, I don't think I need to read this because I don't care about video games, but actually I've always wanted to be a video game girly, but I just never got into it because the equipment is incredibly expensive. I was always told like video games are not for girls, or like just, yeah, annoying things like that. But I was still curious because I was like, why do so many people love this book? Like, if it's just about video games, there's no way that all these people can love this book. I read it, I gave it a chance, I listened to it on audio. So basically this book, if you didn't know, it's about Sam and Sadie who come together to create a video game, and they get this newfound success from this game. It has this lasting impact on their relationship. I was really hesitant to read this book because, like, again, it just has so much hype. I hate watching stuff that has so much hype around it. I hate reading things that have so much hype around it. Like, I have to wait till the hype dies down and then read it, which is kind of what I did for this book. But I'm really glad that I did, because I really liked it, and it was just such a beautiful book about friendships, about love, about loss, about success, about failure. And it was definitely a frustrating read because the characters are just always going back and forth. But nonetheless, like, obviously there was a plot to this book, but it was also very character driven, which I haven't read a lot of books where the authors are able to balance both. I really like that about this book, and I need to buy a physical version, so I would give this book a 4-star. The 14th book that I read is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. I read this on my Kindle. This is about Calla, who flies back to Atlanta to meet her estranged father after she finds out that he is passing away. And there she meets a guy named Jonah who works for her father, and at first they don't really get along because he's just very broody, and she's like a city girl who he thinks is like very uptight and pretentious, but slowly they start, you know, falling for each other. I surprisingly really like this. This was one of the romance books that I liked more. Like, it was like 3.5 stars, which is revolutionary for me. Yeah, this is another book that's so hyped in like the romance, amongst the romance gang, you know, in like TikTok and YouTube, booktube. This one was actually a good one because I love the slow burn of Calla and Jonah's relationship, which usually isn't my thing because I'm very impatient. I'm like, just get to the point. But I loved their banter. It was actually funny, and it was also really nice to see Calla and her dad reconnect and bond. And I got quite emotional with reading some of the moments between Calla and her father, because like it's just like some things that I could relate to without getting too much into my own life. The more and more that you read the book, you can tell like Jonah's actually very sensitive, and he's very attracted to her. And yeah, I mean, he says some awful things to her, not gonna lie, but at the end of the book you end up liking him. And Calla, even though she's like the city girl that's like not used to the country and all that, like she's actually like not insufferable. So yeah. The next book that I read was The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I read this on my Kindle. This is the third book in the Blood and Ash series, so I really can't say much other than like I just can't say much without spoiling, you know, the rest of the two books prior to this one. But this was just so annoying to read, you guys. I gave this 2 stars. There was too much times spent explaining the history of Atlantia and the other places in this book that I don't give a shit about. I think it's like Carcedonia, if I remember correctly. And it was boring, and it was so long. And for what? I didn't care about any of the characters, which sucks, because in the first book I loved them. The second book I was like, okay. In the third book I'm like, I want to throw my Kindle across the room. So I don't really care about any of the characters, and I just wanted this book to end, and at one point it did, so thank God. And the thing about me, I don't know if you know this or not, but I don't read enough books. I don't have OCD, I don't think, but I can't, you know, I have to finish the book no matter how bad it is. So actually I've only ever DNF'd one book in my life, that's The Godfather, so yeah. And then the very last book that I read this year, I listened to on Libby, is one that my friend suggested to me. It's Sociopath, which is a memoir by Patrick Gagne. This is a memoir about Patrick, who comes to terms with her own sociopathy. Ever since she was young, she recognized that she processed her emotions, or I should say lack of emotions, differently than other kids. And she tried really hard to be like other people, but extremely tough for her. So she turns to educating herself about sociopathy, because there was little to no resources at the time on this topic. And so she goes to college and she takes classes about psychology and sociology, and she goes to therapy and learns a lot about herself. Overall, this was an extremely interesting book. There's a lot of criticism about this book because people say that her degrees are not, because I think she has like a PhD and like all this stuff, and people say like she didn't actually do all that, like her achievements are all fake. But I don't know if that's necessarily true, but was very educational. And I consider myself to be a pretty open-minded person, but I didn't realize how much of my own stigma I had about this subject. I had so many like predisposed beliefs about sociopathy, because I think the way that I've seen it most is through Hollywood, if I'm being honest, and obviously they show sociopaths in a very singular way, but she kind of explains it as a spectrum, and so she's kind of like on the lower end of the spectrum. It's very interesting, honestly. I would recommend it, whether it's real or not. Like, I think the topic, and if you kind of just like separate the person from the topic, like, it's honestly interesting. The narrator was really good. Honestly, so funny at times. It was hilarious at some moments. So those are all the books that I read this year. So I read a total of 27 books. My goal was 40. Didn't reach the goal because 2024 was not a great year, but I think it was pretty like 40-50. I think 40% of the books that I read this year were good and 50 were bad. Oh no, 60, sorry, 60 were bad. But I'm doing 40 books again this year as my goal, so let's hope I actually reach it this time. Yeah, those are all the books that I read.